so double check, and they're here. If anybody's lost a pair of glasses, Joanne, if it's yours, let me know, okay? Anyway, today we're really excited. I said last night in mentioning about the speaker that we're going to have in just a few minutes that I've been in the financial services business. My name is Susan Moore for 25 years, and I can't imagine a more relevant time to have someone talk about the Fed and its impact on the economy. We truly live in a volatile world right now, and the Fed has had to step up to the plate and do things, pull out things from its record book from the 1930s to deal with the crises that we've had over the last several months. And they have risen to the challenge admirably. So again, I can't imagine a more relevant time to hear the speaker that we're having today. We're really delighted to have Dave Dennis with us. He is the CEO of Specialty Contractors, Inc., which is an industrial and commercial contractor out of Pass Christian, Gulfport, Mississippi. And Dave, the more relevant part is that Dave has served 3 terms as the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board in New Orleans. Now, he was elected in 2001 as a business representative to the Federal Reserve Board and impressed them all so much that he was elected chairman of that board and served it, as I said, for 3 terms, and he stepped down in December. The important part about that is that he can be a lot more candid with us today than he might have been able to be when he was still on the Federal Reserve Board. I think I want y'all to put this down in your little notepad. I am in the business of having to advise and predict and project as the nature of my business, and I think I will make the prediction that you might be looking at one of the future governors or senators from Mississippi. So y'all write that down and keep that in your mind. That's my prediction, not his. But anyway, he would come to that with just a record of public service that is very, very admirable. As in addition to the Federal Reserve work, he is currently serving as chairman of Leadership Mississippi. He's on the Mississippi Economic Council's Executive Committee and the Knight Foundation Community Board. But prior to that, he has recently served as chairman of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce, the president of the Gulf Coast Economic Council. He's been chairman of the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. He's been the state chairman of BIPAC, which is a salute to business and industry in Mississippi, state regional chamber coalition representative, the president pro tem of the Coast Coliseum Commission, and president of the St. James School Board. So this is a man that gives back to the community. In addition, when Hurricane Katrina came through and pretty much wiped out Pass Christian, both Dave and his wife Jane stepped up to the plate and both helped serve on the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal as chairman of the Historical Preservation, Cultural Preservation, and Museums. So they really came to the forefront. He was named following Hurricane Katrina as the Boy Scouts of America's Distinguished Citizen of the Year. In addition to his role as a business leader, serving on the Federal Reserve, and in all these civic capacities, he's also been an outstanding husband and father. And his wife, Jane, who is in the audience with us, is a powerhouse in and of herself. In 2007, she was named Mississippi Business Journal's Businesswoman of the Year. And the 2 of them have 2 children, Katie and Patrick, and Katie is here with us today, and I had the great pleasure of sitting with Katie last night. I have a Kate of my own, 9 years old, and the biggest compliment that I can pay to Dave and to Jane is that I hope that my Kate grows up to be like their Katie. He's been a great father. So again, with no more further ado, Dave Dennis about the Fed and its impact on the economy.
Those of you that were here earlier, I apologize. Some of what you're going to hear you heard earlier. Other things I'm going to change up and talk a bit more about geopolitical, perhaps about China, perhaps about a few other things. And I would say, Dean Hinton, thank you very much for what WPB does, for what it means to women, what it means to a lot of people. I don't see a lot of alpha males in here. There's a few, but when you get in this kind of room, it gets a little intimidating for most guys. So I would say thank you for the opportunity. And I appreciate what you and your whole staff, Sid, and others have done so significantly. I'm going to talk in broad brush terms about the Federal Reserve and then dig into a few other things. If you were here earlier, we talked a bit about how the Federal Reserve is structured. John Manley earlier talked about the Fed being a congressional enabling legislation that took place in 1913. The Fed started, and it was designed to take the highs and the lows out of the economy. There have been some very significant peaks in the economy from the 1880s till about 1910. There were several mini depressions, several just real gold rush booms, if you will. And the economy cannot fundamentally operate on an even plane, on an even keel, if you've got nothing but spikes and valleys, spikes and valleys. You're going to wind up with some type of iteration of either depression or super hyperinflation that you just can't manage. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve was enacted through Congress, and what it does, it's designed to stop the major train wrecks that take place in an economy. It's not going to keep everything smooth. It's not going to take care of what you saw in the past 3 or 4 weeks to the degree that unless there's a major problem, at that point, the Fed will zero in. I do need to say that though I'm no longer on the Federal Reserve Board, by term limit I can no longer serve. My comments are mine and not to be perceived as Federal Reserve positions. In a different life, I got paid $200 a month to be on the Fed. This time, they may come looking for me if I say the wrong thing. So I'll just say, I don't want to suggest that what I'm saying is a Fed position, much like John Manley said a few minutes ago. Also, Jane Human is on the WPB board here. Her husband, Phil, is on the Atlanta Federal Reserve, eminently qualified to give the same talk I'm giving, probably much more eloquently than I will, but he is a guy that's deeply involved with the Federal Reserve. So you've got a couple of people on the Women's Philanthropy Board that have had impact with the Feds, and it's really been an honor to be associated with them. I wish my time had not expired, but it has, and that's just the way it is. But a couple of things. Federal Reserve is a private corporation. It is not a government entity. It is not, though it was enacted through Congress, it is autonomous, and some people think that's a good thing, some think it's a bad thing, but at the end of the day, it has the ability to react overnight. It has the ability to make moves on the spur of the moment when it really needs to happen. So the Fed, the people that work there, they're not according to civil service protection. They're private employees of the Federal Reserve Corporation, and it's a pretty intriguing operation. It has to virtually run flawlessly. There's no margin for error for the Fed. If your checking account, if you have a check that clears and suddenly your account is $200 off, somebody's going to hear about it. Well, the Fed is designed to try to keep that from becoming a problem. There are 2 types of general policy, and the econ students in here, I have to tell you, economics, it's not sexy and it's not exciting sometimes, but it deals with what you really have to consider in life. When I was here at Econ 101, I had a lady named Dottie Shirley that was my teacher. She was ambidextrous, and at the time, Dora, you're laughing, you know her. She would walk up to the blackboard. She would write with her right hand going this way, with a cigarette in her mouth and a cup of coffee in her left hand, talking and telling you, and you're going, what is she saying? And you understood it. Then when she would come back, she'd turn around right left-handed and change. The only thing that changed was she moved the coffee cup and the chalk to the other hands. But she was wonderful. She taught you the understanding of economics, not necessarily the fundamental graduate level points of interest, but she got an interest stirred in people. She got you intrigued with what really economics is about. And I have to say she would be one of my probably 3 or 4 favorite teachers here. Of course, Dr. Berry, I did have one class over here, June, so I would have to use that as a disclaimer. Federal Reserve Board. You hear about the Free Open Market Committee, the FOMC. That's the board that actually does interest rates. That's the board that you see this discount window that opens up for interest rates to either go up or down. There are 12 members of that board. 7 are presidential appointees. There are 7 members serving 14-year terms. Now, rarely do people serve out a 14-year term. That's a real serious commitment. But the other 5 that are on those boards are the president of the New York Federal Reserve is continually on there without rotating off, and then 4 other presidents rotate in and out of the FOMC. So the Fed, very private organization, but it operates in the light of day. I mean, everything it communicates in very specific terms, because in an economic environment, one comment by the chairman one way or another can skew a market or perhaps tilt a concern or tilt an attitude or perception in the wrong direction. Questions come up about Chairman Greenspan versus Chairman Bernanke. I was one of Chairman Greenspan's Board of Governors appointments, so that was not on the Board of Governors, but the Board of Governors appointed me. And I have to tell you, he's an intriguing guy. He turned 81 on March the 6th. Ben Bernanke turned 53 on December 13th. They're different, but they're alike. Chairman Greenspan, Jane and I had the privilege of listening to him play a saxophone, play a clarinet, perhaps drink serious adult beverages in Nashville late at night and other occasions. Wonderful guy. Chairman Greenspan would deal with things intuitively, instinctively, and what he would look at is, what is the best case? What is the worst case? Let's find a happy medium and work with it. Chairman Bernanke is a bit more academic, but I'm going to tell you, he's very eminently qualified. You're in good hands. He is certainly being tested by fire at this point in time with the credit crisis, and I think he'll turn out to be just fine. Bernanke is a person that he came into his position after having served as a Board of Governor, after having served as chairman of President Bush's Council of White House Advisors, financial advisors, and he came in to an environment where things were in an upward mode. Well, when the credit crisis evolved, the questions are, what really causes it? What is taking place with a Bear Stearns 4 weeks ago when you take an 80-year-old icon of a financial institution that has gone from having $150 or $170 stock valuation a few months ago to $70 a month and a half ago to $50 on a Thursday and $2 on a Friday? What causes that? What causes that total meltdown? Well, it generally is a number of focal points that hit in a perfect storm scenario. In this instance, it generally was considered liquidity versus solvency, and I'll try to explain that. If you look at a balance sheet, those of you that are in accounting, you see your cost of goods, you see your cost accounting statements, you look at your balance sheets, and I know when I took accounting kids, I just, you say, what is all this stuff about? Well, it's a case of you have an income statement, you have a balance sheet, and you look at a balance sheet, and the balance sheet says, well, heck, we've got assets. You look at an income statement, well, man, we're good. We made some money last year. Well, in reality, you can make money, you can have assets, but if you don't have any cash, you're not liquid. Well, what's going on right now is, it's like you own your car, you own your house, but you don't have any money in your checkbook, so what are you going to buy groceries with? That, in reality, in a broad brush comment, is where Bear Stearns was. They had a position of solvency. They had a great balance statement. In fact, the chairman was on television on Sunday before the meltdown on Fridays, I guess hopefully trying to convince the public that things were okay. They were in a position that if they could have waited another 21 to 30 days, somewhere in that range, to get cash, which they had coming in, they would have been okay. But they got caught in that box of not having any cash. So liquidity, solvency. Solvency is great to say you're worth a lot. Liquidity, if you don't have any money in your pocket, you've got a problem. And that's where the investment banking arena found itself a few weeks ago. Is it going to be a problem? I think perhaps, and this is a personal opinion only, that it probably has been stayed. John Manley talked about, we probably, if we have another low, it's probably going to reflect what we saw a few weeks ago. I would tend to think that's likely the case. But had Bear Stearns been left to its own demise, if you will, there could have easily been a domino within the investment banking community. And let me define the differential between those. Banks are the banks you see, a national bank on any corner in any hometown USA. Chase Manhattan, a bank. But then on the other hand, you have investment houses that play by a whole different set of rules, and really they play by very few rules, which was to some degree the problem they had. Smith Barney, that John spoke from their behalf, and Todd was in here earlier. A lot of good people, very strong company. In fact, in the back, I'm sorry. They come from a different perspective. You talk about you have a savings account in a bank, you've got an FDIC guarantee of $100,000 on your savings account and other things. That is great for about 98% of this country. But the real growth is done through entrepreneurial considerations, through growth within the business community, through people taking risks and chances that John also mentioned earlier. To a degree, that's what many of these investment houses deal with. They deal with investing at higher levels at very quick, almost instantaneous concerns. Someone may call them at 2 in the afternoon and want something pegged and marked by 4 in the afternoon, and they have that capacity to do that. Well, if they get in a position of no liquidity, then they don't have that option, and it looks like things have been stayed in pretty good shape from that point of view. The Fed was asked to come in and overlay the top of the investment banking business. I cannot imagine it being something the Federal Reserve had asked for. In fact, Jane and I had dinner with the head of research for the Fed. I have to tell you, eating crawfish and drinking Amstel Light Thursday night, that was the level this discussion was at. But that is how you can just really sit down uninhibited and talk. The real meetings are obviously done in a very professional, very recorded manner. But the Fed has been given a charge last Monday through Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson at President Bush's direction to go in and, in effect, regulate the investment banking business. Now, that's got to go through Congress. When it comes out, I doubt it will resemble a whole lot of what goes in, but at some point, the investment banking community probably will have to have some kind of parameter box to operate within. If you go out and play a game on Jordan Hare without any referees, it's going to be a free-for-all. And to a degree, that's what you were looking at in many instances, was not having clear and defined rules to go with. So Fed is in that position. Question comes in, how does the Federal Reserve raise and lower interest rates? As you're looking at your economics classes, guys and girls, you look at supply and demand. Boring. I mean, it's hard to get excited about it, but everything is supply and demand. In reality, if you look at your oil pricing right now and what you're paying at the gasoline station, that's supply and demand. There's a strong demand worldwide, and I'll touch on geopolitical in a few minutes, but as you look at supply and demand, it drives down inventories, so consequently supply and demand, prices are going to go up. Well, the Federal Reserve lowers and adjusts interest rates on that same supply and demand philosophy. If you have a market that is overheating, which it might be nice to have right now because we certainly don't have one, we've got one going in the opposite direction. But if inflation is a problem, if the market is accelerating at a pace that's not sustainable, the Federal Reserve will go into the open market and in effect buy bonds, supply and demand. They'll go in and buy bonds, pull them out of the market so it constricts the money supply. You read about M1, M2, M3, and the different money supplies. When the money supply constricts, then supply and demand, interest rates are going to work up. And the Federal Reserve doesn't just call up a bank and say, we want your interest rate to be 7%, or we want you to uptick a quarter or half a point. It's an implied rate. It's a target rate, and that's what they shoot for. So supply and demand, if they want rates to go up, they buy bonds, pull them out of the market, and put them on the shelf at the Federal Reserve. If the economy is in trouble, and there are those that said it has been in the last few months, if they need to in some way stimulate the economy, they'll sell bonds into the market. That's what's going on right now. You read about the money supply increasing by $50 billion 1 week, or something of that general range. That is nothing more than the Federal Reserve taking money, selling it into the market, and the more you put in there, it's going to drive the price down. So again, supply and demand. As bonds are sold into the market, money supply increases, there's more of it, it's more plentiful, the cost is going to go down. So that's how the Federal Reserve will adjust rates. And they normally would do it a couple of times a day. They'll look at it at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and then perhaps again at noon, and they'll make several adjustments during the day, because you can sit in Chairman Greenspan or Chairman Bernanke's office, and they've got normally 3, or Chairman Greenspan had 3 computer screens. Each of them had about 5 or 6 different graphs that showed different trends, different movements. And in calculus here that I struggled with, I wondered what the parabolas were about. And again, John mentioned that I found out they deal with inflections, they deal with tipping points, they deal with upward ticks in your yield curves. And it really is something that, if you really sit and look at it, economics is very basic. The Federal Reserve, though it operates at an incredibly high-tech level, it's a basic supply and demand organization. It's got a number of charges for maintaining the monetary policy, for maintaining check clearing in a lot of arenas, though some private institutions and other firms do their own check clearing. It deals with the cash. 67% of all cash is held outside of this country. I'm going to say that again. 67% of all green cash, $100 bills, $50 bills, 10s, 20s, 67% is held outside of the United States. Now, what does that really mean? It means that other countries, no matter what's going on here right now, they look at the United States as the benchmark, as the reserve currency of record, and the euro may be going up and the dollar falling right now. That'll change in time, and it likely will change in a couple of years. It may not change perhaps in 2009 or 10, but at some point it'll inflect back up, and at that time you will see the changes taking place in terms of imports and exports. With a weak dollar, items made in this country are cheaper to sell overseas. Yeah, there's some pluses and minuses to a soft dollar. The soft dollar currently says that the Chinese that are selling into this country, well, suddenly their products are more expensive because we have a weaker dollar. If you go on the other equation, things we make in the United States and want to export overseas, those items are less expensive overseas, so consequently, a weaker dollar is to some degree stimulating the economy in the United States because it gives them an opportunity to bump it up. But just a few things, I cannot emphasize enough to you what a good organization the Fed is. And rest assured, they are just as concerned as you are, just as concerned as Jane and I are. That organization is clearly on top of it. We'll talk about a couple of other things. China, I did not talk about them this morning. China has a lot of things that from a perception perspective, people are concerned about. China is about 9% of our economy. The Chinese GDP is about 9% of the U.S. economy. China's total economy is about the size of California's economy. So put that in a perspective that, are they coming at us like a steamroller? Well, they're growing at a faster pace than we are. Currently, we were growing until a couple of quarters ago at maybe a 3 or 4% annual growth rate. China's growing anywhere, depends on what numbers, and you don't know if they're accurate or not, anywhere from 9 to 11 to 12%. Well, what will that do? Well, it will at some point give them upward mobility and upward movement in their manufacturing, in their exports to many countries, including us. But the Chinese have a few unique problems that they're not addressing that I don't mean to go back to what John Manley said, those of you that were here earlier. The U.S. addresses its problems. They address them, and they address them fairly rapidly, just by the nature of us being a free democracy. It can be tough to have a free press, and you can get pelted by comments from commentators, but it's healthy. It gets a problem on the table. It lets a solution come forward. Well, the Chinese have 3 or 4 things they're dealing with. Number one, they've got inflation, and they've got their thumb down totally on top of inflation. So at whatever point it explodes out, they're going to have a bigger concern here, or a bigger concern in their economic situation than we are. Inflation, one item. Second item, they've got a lot of loans that the Japanese in the early 80s, in effect, had their lifetime commitments to their employees. With the Chinese, I think their lifetime commitment is with a pistol, but regardless, it's a commitment, and their loans and the things that they're doing in a speculative building mode over there likely will, they're going to have to address some of those loans, and they're not doing it currently. But the biggest problem they will face will be a social concern. When the peasants come in from the rice paddies and come in out of the mountains, and they get into the cities, and they eat a Big Mac and eat a pizza and see a color television set and the internet, they're not going back out there. So the concerns that China has are going to be probably much more significant than we're dealing with here from a social perspective. But the Fed is, though Chairman Bernanke was over in China in late November, it's still a situation they've got to deal with. I want to go back to liquidity and solvency, because I would like for that point for the students to stay very clear. Bear Stearns had a great balance sheet. They had everything in play. They had solvency, but not liquidity. They had solvency, but not liquidity. And what the Federal Reserve had decided about a 2-day period was the risk of not acting greater than the risk of just letting chance take its place? And I think the final decision came down to we could not risk letting chance just happenstance take place. And ultimately, that's what happened to Bear Stearns. They had a situation that it snuck up on them. It could sneak up on other businesses, though I think most people are more likely to be in tune with it now. But you've got to just stay in focus on what's going on. And the supply and demand aspect, it is in the most simplistic common denominator, that is how our economy works. That is how things evolve. And it's really a fun thing. But we have had I would just say, an incredible run. It's an organization that if you want to study it for an hour or so and just read what they do, a lot of people that are in there, for all intents and purposes, are volunteers. You've got captains of industry that are in Fed board positions and on the board of governors and other places that they understand how things ought to work, and consequently they're working toward that. But geopolitically, I think the dollar, it'll take care of itself. It will likely be the sacrificial lamb for balancing the economy. It's almost like a check valve on the top of your steam cooker on the stove. When something had to give to balance all of the different parts of the equation, the dollar's the part that had to give, and it'll get back in focus. And the U.S. will be fine. We've got a bloody nose here in the last few months financially, but at the end of the day, it's healthy. It's moving forward, and I think you'll be hopefully proud of what's going on. Got a lot of things. Susan, I have to tell you, sent us a book a few months ago called When Genius Fails. And when you look at that book, clearly she wasn't talking to me because I'm not at any level that could even understand the book, quite frankly, Susan. But what took place in the 80s, a lot of MIT mathematicians and statisticians took formulas. They took what in a synthesized environment, in a cleansed environment, would work flawlessly. They took mathematical equations that said, all right, with this derivative in this form of investment vehicle, we can go in this direction, and we're bulletproof. We're impervious to any kind of activity other than just a few minor adjustments in the economy. What they didn't take into account was perception, people's feelings, people's anxiety, and that's what has come into play in some of these financial meltdowns. It's a case of consumer confidence. It's a case of pushing forward. And I do think the Fed has tried to take, though they're not controlling it, like I mentioned earlier, the investment banking arena generally operated without a referee system. I think what you're seeing, though, is it's coming into a tighter focus in a tighter, more stable arena. But I've got just a few more minutes. People will due back in here in about 10 minutes. I'll open up for questions if people have them. I didn't give the same comments I gave earlier because a few of you or most of you were in here earlier. A lot of you were. So to that end, I would open up for questions and do my very best.
What is the role of the people at the different offices of the Fed? How does the Fed get their information?
The question is, how does the Federal Reserve get information to make decisions? Anecdotally, branch directors and directors within the Fed system, we would do a report. Many people would have, in large organizations, would have 2 or 3 people putting their reports together. I did every single one of my reports. It would take 2 or 3 days a month to work on Fed business. We were involved because we're a small construction company, 50 to 100 employees, and that's small in most terms of corporate America. We sensed most movements, but the information came anecdotally from branch directors. It came from people you would call up. If the question one month was, how's retail doing? Well, I'd call the malls and the outlets and talk to them and see, how are your sales doing? What's moving? Are high-end items moving? Were holiday sales or transition items moving? And that's where we would get general information. Manufacturing is no different, but it came anecdotally from branch directors. Susan?
Can you compare what the role of the Fed is supposed to be, what it does, versus what the Treasury is and what it's supposed to be?
Question is Federal Reserve versus Treasury. I can give a 10,000-foot look down on it. Treasury does a lot of currency issues. It is in a suggesting mode. Treasury has Secret Service and a lot of other branches under it. The Federal Reserve deals with the monetary policy, meaning, let's see, this is what the money supply should be. Treasury is more, in simplistic terms, the accounting clearinghouse for the federal government, or it is GAO and a lot of others. It's coming into play, but the Treasury works with promoting ideas, with promoting other things, which Chairman Paulson just did, or Secretary Paulson did last week. The Fed is almost like the applicator or the person that implements monetary policy, check clearing, other things, the cash. All the cash that comes in gets washed, it gets scanned for anthrax, for cocaine. Virtually anything over a $5 bill has trace coke, and not anthrax anymore. That was just a blip for a year or two. But most cash, I've got to tell you, when you say somebody's laundering money, the Fed is laundering your money, so it'll be a little bit cleaner when you get your hands on it. Well, another question? Yes, ma'am.
Talk about the regional Federal Reserve boards and what do they do and how does that information feed into the chairman?
Dean Hinton's question was regional boards. I chaired New Orleans, which was part of about a 4-state spoke. We fed into Atlanta, which was the southeast region, and then that fed into Washington. So you had stair steps. The Fed would normally pick a few people that had some special impact on a particular economy and scale and put them into that environment. But the information filtered up to regional, in this instance in the southeast, Atlanta, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, those type major operations, fed into those arenas. Then it was filtered and separated out generally in a per state or per region area, and then sent upstream to the Board of Governors to review and work with. But I would just tell you that this is a very simplistic approach to where the Federal Reserve operates and how it operates. It is an intriguing organization that I have to say I'm very glad it's in place. As a consumer and a person that has a few bank accounts, something needs to be in place to keep it in shape, and it certainly does. I mentioned that Margaret's boss, David Ratcliffe, was chair of Atlanta when I was chair of New Orleans, and did an exceptional job there. So,
Thank you
all right,
very
thank you,
much.
Cindy.